stricken out. Phenix City beats Toms River 3-2 and wins the U.S. National Championship.
In the summer of 1999, the All-Stars of Phenix City, Alabama, won the National Little League Championship and brought national attention to their hometown. This victory had significance beyond the comprehension of these exuberant young boys. Phenix City had been struggling for years to remove the stigma of its dark past and prove to the nation that it was a safe and peaceful town. The phoenix is a bird from Egyptian mythology. Ancient stories tell that a new phoenix rose from the ashes when an old phoenix was consumed by flame. Like its namesake, the town of Phenix City was consumed and reborn.
On the sidewalks of Phenix City, there'd be people walking and standing 6 and 8 deep, going to the clubs and the houses of prostitution and the gambling casinos.
They had suspended the rights of man and the constitutional guarantees. Nobody was safe in Phenix City at that time.
You could walk across that bridge, and you could hear the slot machines and all that laughter going on, and that was the entertainment for the soldiers at that time. Now, if you started trouble, well, they knew how to take care of you.
This is the only place and the only time in the history of this nation that martial law has been declared other than for a riot or a natural catastrophe.
Two towns grew at the falls on the Chattahoochee River. On the eastern bank, Columbus, Georgia is the oldest and largest of the two. It is Georgia's second largest city, a large industrial center. On the western side, Phenix City, Alabama, lies in the shadow of its neighbor. The town's name came from a Columbus textile mill that was rebuilt after being burned in the Civil War.
Going back in my childhood, when they said we went to town, we went to Columbus. Thought nothing of that, you know. You know, their history was the manufacturing, the cotton mill, power company there, with the industry that was there. And then Fort Benning predominantly is on their side, although some of the field, airfield is on our side, on Alabama. So we can claim some ownership, so to speak, of Fort Benning. But, and they've had, you know, definitely the employment base. And most of our constituency here are employed in Columbus.
We were a bedroom of Columbus. Columbus had the industry, Columbus had all the good things supposedly, and we worked over there, and we come home at night over here. Our tax base wasn't very much, and we couldn't afford to have a lot of the things that most communities our side had.
The city fathers had to make a decision as to whether to raise taxes or default on their bonded debt, their bonds. And they opted to authorize gambling to come in, illegal of course, and they collected money in the form of licenses from illegal gambling operations to finance the operations of the city and to pay off the bonded debt to keep from defaulting. And this was a conscious decision that the city fathers made. And so they let them come in. And of course, being illegal, they had to make their peace with Montgomery. And apparently they did over the years. And they were able to operate over here without being bothered.
Well, during that era of Phenix City, that was a way of life for a lot of people. You had the cotton mill, but if that cotton mill cut back, and if you were from Alabama, chances were good during that period in time, you was the first one to leave. So, you know, a lot of people didn't have no other recourse. I mean, the gambling was there. And Phenix City had to have some type of base of revenue.
During World War II, there were 100,000 men training at Fort Benning. Phenix City had over 50 bars, casinos, and houses of prostitution, bringing in an annual income of over $100 million.
The troops, the soldiers, lured by girls and gambling and illegal liquor, would go across the river to Phenix City. And they would completely take advantage of these soldiers. They would get them drunk, and they would get them to gamble, take all of a man's money. If he objected to it, the way he had been ill-treated, then he was beat up and sometimes killed. And General Patton was enraged about what was happening to his troops. And so he publicly threatened to take his tanks across the river and mash Phenix City flat. This was reported in Time magazine. But this didn't stop Phenix City. It was a law unto itself.
Growing up, I didn't see this, the gambling and paraphernalia and all that. I was a child. I could walk the streets. We could walk across the bridge. I mean, at night you could leave your doors open, windows up. But all this was going on behind the scenes, so to speak.
The leading citizens in Phenix City were accepted in churches and other social groups, even though they were the families of the underworld. But that isn't true everywhere else. But they were leaders in churches and everywhere, and they virtually were controlling all the town without most of the good people realizing it.
By the end of the war, a powerful crime syndicate ran everything in Phenix City. Hugh Bentley, a mild-mannered Sunday school teacher, became determined to unite law-abiding citizens and fight the syndicate. Bentley operated a sporting goods store. At a 1949 sporting goods convention, he heard things about Phenix City that convinced him the town had to change.
He had to go to Chicago on a sporting goods convention, and while he was there, he got to talking to one of the salesmen, and evidently that salesman at one time had been a soldier at Fort Benning, stationed at Fort Benning, and he knew how bad the situation was here. And so he really embarrassed Hugh, says the place should be cleaned up, says it's terrible. And of course, I'm sure he went on into a lot of detail with Hugh. And so Hugh come home with telling me what the man said. He says, I'm going to try to do something about it.
Hugh Bentley was instrumental in joining with some ministers to organize a group called the Christian Layman Association, and with a goal of trying to get the law enforced in Phenix City. All they really wanted was the law enforced. If you could get the law enforced, you could clean it up, you see. They would send delegations to Montgomery to meet with the governor in Montgomery and never were able to get anything done. They would say, well, that's a local matter. You'll have to take care of those matters locally. And of course, it had already gotten out of hand here. The courthouse and the city hall were controlled by the gambling syndicate. And the people just couldn't do anything about it.
It was just like some force was pushing him all the time, really pushing him. He didn't understand it, I don't think, and I didn't either, because I'd fuss with him, because I'd have to stay there at night while he'd be gone. I'd stay there with the children while he'd be gone to these different meetings at different places.
On a January night in 1952, while Hugh was away, the Bentley's house was bombed.
When I come to, I looked up and I couldn't understand where I was. So I called to Hubo, and I said, Hubo, where are you? He says, I'm out here in the yard.
The Bentley's son, Hubo, and his bed had been rocketed from the house. The bombing just strengthened Bentley's resolve. He sought the aid of a good lawyer who shared his concerns, Albert Patterson.
Mr. Bentley got with my father, and they organized the Russell Betterment Association, which was in effect, a crime commission. And with the idea of trying to enforce the law ourselves, investigating, going into these places, taking photographs of gambling, and then swearing out warrants and trying to use the court process to stop it.
When I was working with the Russell Betterment Association, I was with a group one night who drove from honky-tonk to honky-tonk locations. We listed the cars outside where they came from. There were very few from Russell County, very few. Most of them were from other states, other counties. It was not the Phenix City people that kept this going. It was other people, and for some reason, where there's a military camp, people seem to think they need to do something to corrupt the poor guys.
They tried to run candidates in the elections to take over the offices, and they were beaten up at the polls, the candidates and their watchers.
This photo of Hugh Bentley, his son Hubo, and friend Hugh Britton, bloodied by an attack outside the polls, ran in newspapers across the country. Other RBA workers had similar experiences.
I challenged Albert Fuller's right to snatch people's ballots out of their hands and say, you can't read and write, can you? And then he would mark it and drop it in the ballot box. And he was a great big fella, and the chief deputy sheriff with a pistol on each hip, and they were frightened to death. So I had to stand up and face him, and I'm only 5 feet and 1/2 inch, and say, I dare you to do another one. I challenge your right to do that. And the sheriff came and got him out of the voting place. He had no business being in there.
But there was a man who pulled up to the car right next to my car and pulled a gun out and pointed it toward me in very crude language. Told me I should go home and take care of, why was not I at home taking care of my children. And I told him I was doing exactly that I had every intention of rearing my children in this town, and that I wanted it to be a clean town, safe for my children. And that's exactly what I was doing.
We feel like that there's more good in the community than there is evil. We're basing all our strength of faith in the good of our community, hoping someday that they will rise up and throw off this ugly reputation that our town has had for the past 100 years. I feel like that it's a dirty, filthy coat that I inherited from my father that I don't want to hand down to my children.
Finally, my father and the rest of the people, Mr. Bentley and the others, Mr. Britton, decided that the thing to do was to run for the office of Attorney General. If they could get the office of State Attorney General with the money and the power that that office has, and it has it, then they could clean up Phenix City.
Had Montgomery been clean, Phenix City would have been clean. The state offices. So the state officials didn't come over here and do their job all the time. I always personally blamed the people who take an oath of office far above the people who are so-called gangsters. The gangsters wouldn't exist if the laws were enforced.
He ran on a platform of a man against crime. And the gamblers and the gangsters, as usual, planned to fix the election. Well, they bought a whole bunch of votes, but they didn't buy enough. And Patterson won on a plurality. And then what they did after that, then they tried to steal the vote. They tried changing the vote totals, and they were caught. And then the word went out, and they said, stop him if you can, and kill him if you have to.
Albert Patterson left his upstairs office at 9 o'clock on the evening of June 18, 1954. He came downstairs and went to his car parked in the alley beside the building. 4 shots rang out, and Albert Patterson was dead. A crowd gathered at the scene.
But the end result of my father's murder, of course, as far as Phenix City was concerned, was Governor Persons had had enough. The people of Alabama had had enough. They insisted that something be done about it. So they sent the National Guard in with General Hanna in charge, put it under martial law, came in with the National Guard, busted up the gambling joints, burned all the equipment, everything, prosecuted about 600 or 700 people. and then over the period of the next year, cleaned it up.
War-hardened General Walter J. Hanna commanded the National Guard troops. He had been given the nickname Crack because of his shooting ability. Hanna shut down illegal operations and collected evidence while new governments were created in Phenix City and Russell County.
When they blew up Bentley's house, they couldn't find a soul or any evidence. And like all these people that got killed and murdered, there ain't any evidence. General Hanna had it hauled in 2.5-ton Army supply trucks and piled in the jail yard. And he filled up the jails.
I was the youngest member, I think, of that grand jury. We met for 6 months, returned over 700 indictments. Some of the people that were indicted were good friends, close personal friends. And those same people that were involved in that were some of the people that had been most generous in helping ball teams and children and churches and things of that nature.
John Patterson followed in his father's footsteps and served as Attorney General of Alabama. He went on to serve as governor. Albert Fuller, the Chief Deputy Sheriff of Russell County, was convicted of the Patterson murder. Other local and state officials were implicated in a conspiracy, but none were convicted. The cleanup of Phenix City made headlines around the world and led to a Hollywood movie loosely based on the events.
As bad as the situation was at its worst, in 1955, this city, following the death of Albert Patterson and the leadership of Hugh Bentley and others, this city was recognized as being an all-American city. And since that date, we've just experienced all sort of growth.
We have good people in this town, and they were under bondage, and they had to have freedom. And it took something terrible to get people to wake up. And I think if the good people of America could take a lesson from this, they'd always be on the alert and go to the polls and vote and do everything they can to make a good America.
It's amazing what has happened since that stronghold on the city, on the courts, the grand juries, the jails, the police, you know, your city and county government. Since that has been broken, it's just amazing what we have been able to do. But it is, I think, a good indication of how not to let the wrong elements take over your city.
After the cleanup, after General Hanna read the proclamation on July 22nd, 1954 in the Russell County Courthouse, life changed dramatically in Phenix City for a lot of people, It rooted out the crime, it closed down the gambling establishment, and which was a good thing. But again, it put a lot of people out of work. A lot of them had made a lot of money. They built other businesses. They went in different type of businesses that were really credible and legitimate. They stayed in Phenix City. They raised their children in Phenix City, and they died in Phenix City.
There was certain feelings that carried over far beyond the death of Mr. Patterson. And all the players, the active players that were involved, I suppose, not a chip on the shoulder, but a certain amount of apprehension about how well received they'd be with this group or that group. Over the years, since I was a very young person, we worked to bring out the better side and let our children know that, you know, even though we might have caused you some heartaches and pain by allowing the stigma that the community once had, you can hold your head up now and go anywhere you want to, because they offer you the opportunities in Phenix City to do elsewhere. I'd have to say, in all fairness, though, that nothing has solidified the feeling towards Phenix City like our Little League Ball Club did.
Come on down through the crowd, okay? We're going to lead you through.
When the Phenix City All-Stars returned from winning the National Little League Championship, thousands of supporters gathered at the Phenix City Amphitheater to welcome them home.
We have to tell the entire nation that we have a city of champions.
Several months later, Phenix City paused to commemorate two of their citizens. Portraits of Hugh Bentley and Albert Patterson were placed in the municipal building that houses executive offices for the city.
I did get some remarks that, why are you doing this? Why are you on a crusade? I was not on a crusade. I'm still not on a crusade. I just feel it's time to recognize those who took the initiative, who took the risk, and stood and acted on their good conscience and their heart for the betterment of their city.
People in Phenix City seem to carry a chip on their shoulder about the area. But when you look at the statistics, incredibly low crime rate, wonderful place to live, great opportunities for recreation and otherwise across the river in Columbus, and you couldn't ask for a better situation, but yet people still wanted to hold on to that.
I have said a lot of times the Phenix City story, in a number of ways, would be a good documentary on how to make a city grow and keep it on the right track, because you don't realize over a period of time, when you don't take an interest, or when your government gets out of kilter the way ours did here in all areas, you know what it can mean, not only for the people of the city, but for the city as a whole.
I think now people are willing to put that all behind us, and I was traveling not long ago, and just a few days ago, and I asked someone asked me where I was from. I said Phenix City, and they mentioned the Little League team, and that is going to change as time goes by, and people will begin to forget all that stuff, and it's part of who we are. It's part of our past. It's part of what makes us what we are today. So I say let's go on.
I remember as a kid, I could almost count on my fingers the kids that were going to college, unless they went on a football scholarship. They went co-oping, working 3 months and going to school 3 months. There was only a very, very restricted few that were able to go to college. Fortunately, that's not the case today. We can go from kindergarten through about 5 or 6 years of college right here in Phenix City, and we're real proud of that.
And we have an industrial park in South Phenix City that we're promoting, and I'm happy to say we have some businesses down there now, and others that are looking at us. And it's just an exciting time. More and more people are moving into Phenix City, and I think that's because of property taxes. This is where we differ from Columbus, Georgia. This is where we have a invitation, if you will, to prospective property owners. The property tax in Alabama has historically been lower than Georgia. All of this is falling in place together to bring the public's eye into seeing where Phenix City is, where it's been, but where it's at today and on the move is like the phoenix bird rising from the ashes, you know. And now we're soaring, so to speak, we're flying. And we might get our wings clipped sometimes. That's life. We're going to have our downs, but we're going to keep going and hold our heads up.
Fire tempers steel. Bad times temper towns. And so we have been through some bad times, and we have learned from it, and we've fortified our resolve, and we're better for it. So in some respects, yes, I think it is something we should look at and learn from.